I see not many of you survived last night. Thinned quite a bunch of us from the herd, I see. It is pretty brutal out there. So I want to thank you for showing up so early this morning. I'm not going to be making this mistake again. In the future, it will be in an hour later starting. Unless you guys are a glutton for punishment. You want me to start an hour later next year? Right on, okay. I can deal with that. Okay, so we did a couple of statistics on some of the registration so far, just to give you an idea of who is here. And I can kind of run through the list a little bit in case you guys are interested. We have 5 people from Australia, 26 Canucks, 1 Belgian, 3 guys from Colombia. We got some people from Denmark. This is an interesting one. We have 8 from England, and then we have 18 from the UK. So I think England must be... Then we have 5 from Finland and 11 from Germany. Let's see what the interesting ones are. 2 from Ireland, 8 from Israel, 13 from Japan, 1 from Korea, 1 from New Zealand, 6 Norway, 3 from the Republic of China, 6 from Singapore, 3 from Spain, 15 from Sweden. Yeah, there they all are. Yeah, Sweden in the house. 3 from Taiwan, 3 from the Netherlands. Okay, so in total we have about 308 from foreign countries, and then we've got about 1,200 or so from the USA, and then all the rest didn't put down basically what country they were in, so we didn't make any assumptions where they're from. And then there's a lot of people who said they're from countries like 182437KM. I wasn't sure what that was, so we ignored it. It's the galaxy? It's the planet number? Yeah, that's what I figured. I've got an administrative announcement or two. Is Benjamin Paulin up this early in the morning? We have 3 of your credit cards. So if you would like them back, come see us. Also, around noon or so, if you're interested in going over to DEF CON, registration opens around noon for everybody. If you want to head over there early, you can do that. So, I think without further ado, I'm going to introduce Bruce Schneier, a man that doesn't really need much introduction. He does quite a bit of speaking and writing, and you has a pretty interesting newsletter. I'm sure everybody gets here. How many people here get Cryptogram? Yeah, see, it's pretty impressive there, Bruce. Many people do not know this, though, but the Cryptogram newsletter originally was part of the Bits newsletter. And when the Bits newsletter went away, Bruce kept it alive, made it his own, and continued to grow it. I first met Bruce back at DEF CON 2. And the way I met him was very interesting. He came running up to me with a friend with a bucket full of water and flour. And he went like this. And he tried to throw it at me, and it didn't go anywhere because he had made oobleck, which is some weird liquid that when you accelerate it quickly, it becomes a solid. So if you take your hand and you try to it was starch, I believe. Yeah, starch, supersaturated starch and water. If you take your hand and you try to jam it in a bucket of this stuff, it bounces off like you're hitting a wall of rubber. But you can slide your hand in slowly and it works fine. And if you jerk your hand out, it picks up the whole bucket.
Never leave this for the maid to clean up, ever.
Yeah. Yeah, the maid at the hotel did not like him. And I'd also known of him from Applied Crypto, his book. And I thought, okay, that's pretty cool. If he must not have much of an ego if he can run around and do that. And then I ran into him. He was again at the third Black Hat at the Venetian when there was a 1-in-100-year storm here in Vegas. Does anybody remember that? Was anybody there? Bruce was up there, and they had this 1-in-100-year storm. The hotel was leaking, power was out everywhere, and the fire alarms kept going off in the middle of his speech, well, in the middle of everybody's speeches, and these huge blast doors came down to block the hallway, and they'd come up, and everybody would be having their coffee, and they'd just duck under the blast doors and keep talking with their friends. And Bruce was giving an address, and lights are flashing, and he would be in the middle of some complex sentence, and then it'd be like, boop, boop, boop. He'd just stop for a minute. The alarm would, go off, and he'd just continue so he's pretty unflappable. And also at that show, he started talking about a new company he was thinking of, internet-type startup. He was thinking, and it would be called Counterpane, and with not as in P-A-I-N, It wasn't a new chiropractic practice he was thinking of. We also have Bruce to thank for all the Secrets and Lies books you have in your hands, hopefully. So let's give Bruce a round of applause for that. If you've seen the flyers, he has a new book coming out soon, so I think he was really just cleaning the closet. But to all of our benefit. So with that said, I'd like to introduce Bruce Schneier for this morning's keynote. Thanks, Bruce.
Good morning. Thanks for waking up. Thanks for having me. Get rid of this. I guess it's there. If there's feedback, let me know. So I want to talk about security and how it relates to the larger world. You know, I've been doing security for a whole lot of years, and one of the most surprising things is how little security has to do with security. And I want to explore that for a while. I want to look at how people make security decisions, why, and how that explains the sort of abhorrent behavior we see again and again. And there should be time for questions at the end. The other caveat is I'm rapidly losing my voice. This is tea. I'll be guzzling it. If I suddenly stop speaking about 20 minutes in, you'll know why. So security is always a trade-off. And I'm not thinking about computer security. I'm thinking about security in general. You know, I've made a whole career explaining computer security using non-computer metaphors. And I want to sort of actually take those non-security metaphors and look at them directly. So think about airline security or home security or credit card fraud or counterfeiting. Any example you want to keep in mind. The security in this hotel, security involved in the badges at this conference. So security is always a trade-off. Really, you can have as much security as you want. It depends what you're willing to give up to get it. Soon after 9/11, I had a reporter ask me, how can we prevent this from ever happening again? And I said, well, that's easy. Just ground all the aircraft. Right? That works. That would be 100% effective, but it's way too large a trade-off for our society. We would never consider giving up commercial aviation in order to gain that security. Right? But if you think about it, in the first few days after 9/11, we did exactly that. Right? The U.S. grounded all the aircraft. Only lasted a few days. It was an extreme trade-off at a very extreme time. And people make these trade-offs all the time. I grew up in New York City, and we had gated communities in some of the outlying boroughs, where people could choose to have extra security in exchange for living with more overt police protection, where they had to show their IDs whenever they wanted to get into their community, where guests had to be registered. Right? That's a trade-off. Right? This hotel makes trade-offs in security. How much they're going to spend on the locks for the doors, how much they're going to spend to catch cheats at the casino. They want more security, they spend more. They want less security, they spend less. Right? It's always a trade-off. And every day we make decisions about these trade-offs. Usually they're intuitive. Now, this morning I was I'm at a hotel across the street, and I was grabbing a candy bar in a shop, and I reach down, and the one I grab is torn. The packaging is torn. Right? So I grab another one. What am I doing there? I'm saying, look, for my 50 cents, I'm going to buy a little more security. Right? It costs me the same. It's a second of inconvenience to grab a different candy bar, and I do it. Right? I made a security decision. Right? Last night, some of you probably put the latch on your hotel room door. Some of you didn't. Right? You made a decision. Now, we make these decisions intuitively. We don't even think about them most of the time. Right? They're based on emotion, they're based on a reaction, they're based on habit. But to do these right, we sort of have to understand how security works. And actually, we have to understand three things. How security works, right? What exactly does that latch on your hotel room door get you? How much more security does it get you? Right? The threats and the risks. Right? What are the threats against someone breaking into your hotel room door? What are the risks? And what are the costs? Right? How much does it cost you to implement that security measure? For your hotel room door, it's easy. Right? If you want to think about buying a home burglar alarm, that's a much more complicated question. But it's the same question. So really, in the end, what you're deciding is the trade-off worth it. We decide that as individuals, we decide it as communities, as countries. And we're asking two questions. Right? We're faced with a security countermeasure. Let's say the countermeasure is ID checks at airports. And we're going to decide, as a society, whether we should do this. But we're going to ask ourselves two questions. One, is the security measure effective in mitigating the risk, right? Whatever that risk is? Right? Is checking IDs at airports an effective countermeasure against terrorism? And two, are the problems and trade-offs caused by it worth it? Right? Is it worth it? Maybe there are additional security risks. There's certainly additional costs in personnel, in time. Right? Are those trade-offs worth what we're getting? Now, sometimes we make that decision personally. When you buy a home alarm system, maybe when you install low jack in your car. Sometimes the decision is made for you by others. None of us here got to decide whether the airline ID check is a good idea or not. That decision was forced on us. But in either case, there's a decision process that I want to formalize a little bit. And I have a 5-step process. I have a new book coming out in September, and you all got flyers for it in your little bags. And I talk about this a lot in the book. I go through many examples of this process. I want to do it sort of in general. And this works for anything. Right? What assets are you trying to protect? What are you defending against? Right? For the badges for Black Hat, we're defending against someone sneaking in and listening to the talks without paying. Now, so what are we defending? What are the risks against those assets? Right? That includes who might attack it, why, how prevalent they might be, how numerous they might be. Right? How many burglars are there in your neighborhood? How likely are they to target your house? How many people in Vegas want to sneak into Black Hat? Right? Interesting question. Now, it's not easy, right? Because DEF CON is a couple days after, maybe people are going to come in early and try to sneak in. If DEF CON and Black Hat were a month apart, maybe there'd be far fewer people trying to sneak in. Right? But understanding what the risk is going to help us figure out whether the countermeasures are worth it. Okay, step 3, how well does the security solution mitigate the risks? Right? How hard are the badges to counterfeit? 1. How accurate are the badge checkers? 2. Right? Understanding those two things will tell us how effective the countermeasure is. Right? And we can ratchet up. We can make the badges harder to counterfeit. We could double the number of guards who are checking badges. Right? There are ways we can play with this. Step 4, what other risks does a security solution cause? Right? Every security solution has ancillary risks. Right? One we have here is people have their names on their badges. People might want to be anonymous. So there's a risk there. But maybe they can be anonymous. Right? We can tweak the system. We now have guards all over Black Hat. Right? Maybe there are problems associated with that. Maybe that's not a perfect idea. There are some risks. And they might be minimal, but we have to understand them. And then step 5, what costs and trade-offs are there? Right? We have to pay for these badges. They're going to cost some amount of money. We have to pay for the infrastructure to distribute them. Right? If this was all on the honor system, it would be a whole lot cheaper. And then finally, after you go through these steps, is it worth it? Right? Is the security we're getting worth what we're giving up? And in the badge case, it's pretty obvious. It seems like it is. Right? It might not be worth it to have $50, high security, non-counterfeitable, fingerprint, biometric, urine sample badges. Right? But for a simple piece of paper that's is on a lanyard around your neck, it seems to work pretty well. And that's the process. And I've been doing this a lot. In the past year, I've been writing this book, and I've been working on this 5-step process with many different things. with airline security, with ID checks in buildings, with invading Iraq. You can actually do this for invading Iraq. You can just run through the steps. You learn, and it sort of surprised me in the beginning, that security is so rarely about security. Right? People don't perform that 5-step process. They almost never do it, or anything like it. People very easily succumb to fear and uncertainty. Right? They often believe false promises of security. People do things counter to their own security, sometimes unfathomable. People say one thing and do another. Right? Any of those surveys you hear about people taking computer security very seriously, it's like one of the most important things IT managers worry about, and yet it's one of the things they spend the least on. Right? People say one thing and do another all the time. Yuck. So I introduced the notion of agenda. And by agenda, I mean, the things people care about. What their agenda is. Right? When you think of complex security decisions, and I don't mean the simple ones like getting a home alarm system. I mean airline security, bag matching. There are many players involved in those decisions, right? Let's do arming pilots. That one's a little more obvious. Right? You've got the airlines, the passengers, the pilots, the flight attendants, the government. Right? All of these players has an agenda. Right? If you're a pilot, having a gun at your side is a cool thing. If you're a flight attendant, having a gun on the other side of the locked door and you're being left to be thrown to the wolves is not a good thing. Right? The flight attendants opposed arming pilots because they were afraid they would get stuck on the other side of the door. The pilots liked it. Airlines, depending on what was going on, had different opinions. So each player has his own perspective, and it's a unique perspective. Right? Each player has his own trade-offs, his own risk analysis. So it's not like there's some, utilitarianism, greatest good for the greatest number analysis. There are a whole lot of subjective analyses. Now, depending on what industry you're in, invading Iraq was more or less a good idea, right, for completely non-security reasons. And the only way to understand security is to understand these agendas, because agendas drive everything about security. And when you evaluate security opinions, why do the airlines like ID checks? You have to evaluate it based on their agendas. Airlines like ID checks because they prevent the resale of non-refundable tickets. Done. Right? Terrorism is a complete red herring. Right? The ID checks solved a business problem airlines had and allowed them to blame it on the government. Right? Not our deal. The government says ID checks. Right? Airlines oppose pretty much every security measure that the government tries to instill because it costs money. ID checks they liked. So very often, these security decisions are made about non-security reasons. And I'm going to give a whole bunch of examples. So what I have is a whole series of graphics, and I'm going to try to walk you through what's going on. And a lot of this is, I think, basic economics. Right? It's the trade-offs. It's the making a smart buying decision. So let's go. So in the center, you have some sort of assets you want to protect. And there's a security system surrounding those assets, whose job it is to defend them. We always think about a security system as keeping the bad guys out, right? That's the goal of it. It's actually not true. A security system has two goals: keeping the bad guys out and letting the good guys in. It has to do both. So you've got legitimate users who have to get to the assets and attackers that have to bounce off the security system. Right? And a system works if it allows that to happen. A system fails if it allows the opposite to happen. Right? When a legitimate user is turned away, it is also a failure. I'm always amazed at the the guys at airline security, when they catch a grandma with a pocket knife, they say how, the system has succeeded. It's actually not true. That's a failure, right? That's a security failure. An innocent person has been prevented from taking a pocket knife on an airplane. They're convincing you it's a success. It's not. But that's an example of a security failure. And it's just like a bad guy being allowed to take a knife through. Both of those are failures. Now, because in our society there are more good guys than bad guys, there are way more failures of legitimate users than failures letting the bad guys in. Maybe think about airline security. They've stopped, I've seen absurd numbers, the number of little pocket knives and screwdrivers and nail files and other nonsense they've confiscated. They've probably stopped 0 hijackings. Right? So there's an enormous number of failures against legitimate users and very, very few failures against attackers, only because there are so few attackers. Even a system as lousy as that lets, something like 1/3 of all knives still get let through. I know my pocket knife gets through about, a lot. Way more often than it should. So you have to think about both of those successes and failures. Okay, so the attackers are actually more complicated, right? There's an attacker who has a goal and launches an attack, right? That, to me, is a threat. Now, and this is important, right? If the attacker is a terrorist and his goal is to blow up an airplane, and we, as the mayor of Los Angeles wants to spend $8-point-something billion securing LAX, and the terrorist drives to Orange County, we haven't actually done anything, right? That was a waste of money. Because the attacker doesn't care what airport he goes to. And that's important to consider. If we secure our airlines and the terrorists move to shopping malls, how much have we gained? So you always have to think about the attacker and what his goal is. And that depends on your agenda, right? If you are a homeowner, you care about the burglar attacking your house. If you put a burglar alarm on your house and the burglar goes next door and breaks in, that's okay with you, right? That's a win, right? But if you're the mayor of the city, that's not a win because the crime rate hasn't gone down. So this depends on your perspective and your agenda. Right? United Airlines cares about terrorism against United Airlines. If someone blows up a U.S. air flight, that's a tragedy, but it doesn't affect his business in the same way. So threats are complicated. And attackers can be legitimate users. Right? Burglars can open bank accounts. People who commit credit card fraud can have legitimate bank accounts too. Right? Terrorists can fly on airplanes just because they want to get somewhere. And that also is a huge complication when you're building a system. Right? And then there are also other targets. Right? If you can shunt the attacker away, have the burglar break in next door. Okay, now sort of get to the other side. There's the asset owner. Right? Somebody owns the assets who's basically in charge of the security system. So American Airlines owns the planes. So I don't know, the city of Las Vegas owns the airport here. Some company owns a chemical processing plant. You own your home. Jeff Moss owns DEF CON. There's an asset owner who's in charge of the security system. But it's very diffuse. Right? Jeff Moss doesn't check all your badges personally. Right? Jeff sets a policy, and that policy is implemented by a combination of trusted people and trusted systems. So the policy is, we'll distribute badges, and everyone must wear them. That policy is carried out by the people who issue the badges and the people who check the badges. Right? And any of those people can subvert the system. If the people who check the badges decide that if they get, you slip them $5, they'll let you through, the system fails. If the people that issue the badges decide the same thing, the system fails. So because the asset owner doesn't have direct control, he's forced to put an infrastructure in place which has security implications. You see that a lot on computers. Right? The people who own the computers have to trust the software that provides their security. And an attacker can attack that trusted system directly. The asset owner is affected by the risks. So the asset owner is worried about what the risks are. And to me, the risks are the threats, the combined set of threats, the various threats and the probabilities. And this affects the asset owner. He's going to use his perception of the risks, which may or may not be accurate, to make his decisions about how security works. We might all be terrorized. The DC Sniper is a good example. In a couple of weeks, the DC Sniper was rampaging the capital area. The murder rate in the counties he was operating doubled. I mean, that's it. It was really a very minimal effect. Yet the perceived risk was so great that people changed their lifestyle. Right? So there's the risks and there's the perceived risks. And certain risks are perceived to be great. Generally, in my book, I give a whole list of the way perception of risk is different from real risks. The DC Sniper is a great example. People's perception of the risk was much, much greater than the actual risk. And the asset owner is affected by a lot of other considerations that are not security. And it's a bit hard to read. I have social moral considerations, technological considerations, legal considerations. Right? You might decide it's a good idea to mine the front lawn of your home, but it's illegal. You might do it anyway, but it's illegal, right? It's a bigger trade-off. You might want to carry a gun because it makes you feel safer. It might be illegal for you to do so. You might decide to do it, but you're making a greater trade-off, right? The legal system is opposing an additional trade-off on that decision, right? Technology does that too. Right? Home burglar alarms really shot up when wireless models became prevalent, because it was really expensive to drill wires all through your house to alarm your doors and windows. Wireless was easy and a lot cheaper. So here's a technological consideration that affected an owner's security decision. Right? He's going to make a different sort of trade-off because the technology makes things possible. Right? And they're economic trade-offs. I mean, the good example is the airlines and ID checking. Right? They're making a wholly economic decision. It is not a security decision. It's not a terrorism decision. Right? And the asset owner is affected by legitimate users. Way back in the days after 9/11, the government wanted to ban laptops on airplanes. And the airline said, don't do it. That's crazy. You can't. We'll lose all our customers. All right? Our business travelers need to travel with laptops. So the legitimate users imposed a constraint on the asset owner about security, a completely non-security constraint. A bank would be more secure if they strip searched everybody who walked into the branch. Right? That would work, right? No doubt about it. And they'd have no customers. Or the customers wouldn't stand for that kind of security countermeasure. I've always been amazed that in the months after 9/11, when we were confiscating, corkscrews and penknives and tweezers, we never confiscated matches and lighters. I mean, actual combustible materials. And it turns out that the tobacco lobby just got to Congress, right, and said, "Don't do that. You can't do this." There's an example of another party affecting the security decision. Right? And lastly, the trusted people affect the asset owner. Right? What the trusted, the guards out there, might be unwilling to do certain things. There's certain countermeasures that they're just say, we're not going to do that. So, if you look at that chart, the actual effectiveness of the security system, which is that green and red arrow in the bottom right-hand corner, is a teeny, tiny consideration in the overall security picture. That asset owner, who's the one actually making the decision, is so far removed from those arrows that he barely notices them. Everything else is much, much more important in his decision. And I got lots of good examples of this. Detecting counterfeit money. This is actually interesting. If you think about it, it is not in your best interest to find counterfeit money in your wallet. Right? Any anti-counterfeiting system that relies on you guys to find counterfeit money will fail, because you just won't do it. Right? What you want to do is, look at your money very cursorily when you receive it, and then never look at it carefully again. Because honestly, you don't want to know. Right? You just want to pass it on. And the government understands this. They actually don't rely on you guys to detect counterfeiting. KAL-007, that is a Korean plane that was shot down over Russia some years ago. Interesting story. The general who ordered it shot down did so, I believe, because the last time this sort of thing happened, and the general didn't order the plane shot down, he was executed. So the general's making a perfectly reasonable decision, right? Right? Given his agenda, it makes a lot of sense. Credit card verification. We always laugh that sales clerks never verify credit card numbers. Signatures, and they don't. We know it. I've signed odd things. They don't care. Right? The clerk doesn't care. He's getting paid on salary. It doesn't matter to him. His agenda is not to prevent fraud. It's actually easier for him just to accept the card. You're there, you're being pleasant, he's being pleasant. Why disrupt this beautiful relationship? Very different if the store owner is accepting your card. Oh, what else is there? Home building inspectors. This is interesting. I don't know if anyone owns a home. When I bought my home, last home a few years ago, I hired a building inspector. Interesting security system. This is someone who I hire to look over the house I'm going to buy and see if there's anything wrong with it. Right? Basically, I don't have the expertise to judge the quality of a house. And so I hire him as my agent to do that for me. Now, I pay him, so he's working for me. However, he's recommended by the real estate agent. Right? So if you think about it, if he too often tells buyers not to buy homes, the agent will no longer recommend him. Right? He has a conflict of interest. So his agenda is not to be perfectly truthful to me. His agenda is to help the real estate industry keep churning, because that's how he makes his money. Mercenaries are a good example, right? If you don't pay them, they tend to attack you, right? Because their agenda is not your agenda. DVD region encoding. Interesting. I always wondered about this, and you can explain it with agendas. The movie industry demands this region encoding, yet people, consumers, some of them demand to be able to play DVDs from anywhere. So what we find is the DVD manufacturers put region encoding in their hardware, but then they put in ways to bypass it, which leak out into the community. Because the hardware manufacturers just want to sell the hardware. So, if they could if they could play both ends, they're going to do that. Last one, bank verification of check signatures. I don't know if you know it, but banks only verify signatures for checks greater than some number of thousands of dollars. Right? If you write a check for $40, nobody will ever verify the signature. Right? The reason is, it is cheaper for the bank to just let it go through and fix it on the back end if somebody claims fraud than it is to spend the money checking. I mean, IRS works the same way. I mean, they let all of us fill out our tax returns, and we can write fiction if we like, and they check it on the back end once in a while. So where does this lead us? It leads us to what I think of as negotiation. Negotiating for security. In the end, all security decisions come from a negotiation between players. Right? The airline industry and the government and the pilots union and the flight attendants union, and if there is a passenger advocacy group, then them, get together in a smoke-filled room and hammer out a security policy. And understanding how to be more secure means understanding how those negotiations are working. It means understanding the agendas of the players. Because depending on the power of the player, that player will have more or less influence. Right? We as peons have very little influence. The airlines as a group can say, no, you cannot ban laptops. Or for many years, they successfully fought positive bag matching at airports. And if you don't have power in negotiation, there's not much you can do to affect your own security. I mean, the average person in Iraq has no power over how the U.S. military operates. Right? Security just happens to him. And what that means is, even for us, we have very little control over most of the security systems that affect our life. When we come to this hotel, we can't say, give me the more secure room, or give me the less secure room. I can't fly on, less secure airways. We get you there faster with less hassle, right? Or more secure airways. We run DNA checks on your passengers. Companies tend not to compete on security. Sometimes they do. If you remember tamper-proof packaging in the wake of the Tylenol poisonings, for a while companies would tout, we have tamper-proof packaging. Now, this doesn't mean that you're completely powerless to affect your own security, but what it means is that you tend to be powerless directly. Right? Walking through an airline security checkpoint is not the time to negotiate your security. Right? You can't say to the guard, I'll tell you what, I'll pay you double for the ticket if you let me go through without searching my bags. Right? That doesn't work. Right? It only works if you aggregate. If as a air passengers union, like the AARP or the gun lobby, as a group, you can get yourself power in negotiation. And this is because I believe security is really all about money. Right? It's all about who's making the right decisions. Can you refill this for me? My voice is holding out. This is good. So the best way to change your security is to change the environment, change the agendas. Right? Change the agendas of the other players. Or give yourself power so that your agenda is heard, which effectively changes their agenda. Right? The government has a certain agenda, but if we as the people say we want X, the government, whose real agenda is getting reelected, is likely to do what we want. So there are 4 basic ways to accomplish this. And if you read Larry Lessig's Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace, these are actually his 4 ways of affecting cyberspace. So the first way is government intervention. Laws and regulations change agenda. If it is illegal to mine the front lawn of your home, fewer people will do it. Right? If it is required to do positive bag matching at airports, the airlines will do it. Right? Because going to jail is no fun. We're changing the agenda of the players by making certain things illegal and certain things mandatory. Right? Regulations do that. That works. The marketplace works. Right? If we as consumers only buy Tylenol or only buy drugs, over-the-counter drugs, in tamper-proof packaging, then companies will provide that because we as consumers are speaking with our wallets. We demand this level of security and we're going to pay for it. You can change agendas through technology, right, by making certain things cheaper or easier. Right? When a firewall becomes an appliance, it's more likely to be used because it's now easier. Right? Technological advances will make some security trade-offs more palatable. Excellent. And then social norms. Right? In Japan, you can leave your bicycle unlocked and it'll never get stolen. Right? The social norm in the country is different than it is in the US. So changing the social norms will change the agendas of players. It's hard. This is the hardest one to do. And often you hear at these sorts of conferences, what do we need to teach people about the ethical use of computers? I mean, it's a slow process, but it's also a very powerful process. And the method that makes sense depends on the situation. Right? There's no one thing that always works. It's very variable. It depends on the details. Sometimes you want to use the marketplace. Sometimes you want to use regulation. Sometimes technology can just do it by itself. And the goal, sort of as a security guy, the goal is to align interests with capabilities. Because to me, I want to sort of manage risk as effectively as possible. I want to figure out an acceptable level of risk, and then, based on the trade-offs, and figure out who's in the best position to mitigate it. And then give him the incentive. Like if we give all you guys a finder's fee for detecting counterfeit money, that was like double the amount of the bill, you'd all do it. Right? If we align your interest with your capability, we'll have a much better security system. Right? The best security systems are the ones where the security requirements are aligned with the agendas of the players. And I'm going to give one example. It's the second one. You ever see when you walk into a convenience store, it's often a sign on the register. It says, "Your purchase free if you don't get a receipt." I'm going to explain. That is actually a brilliant security system. I'm going to explain how it works. The owner of the store wants to prevent employee fraud, employee theft. And an easy way for an employee to steal money, and to do that, the employer has a cash register. And at the end of the day, the employer will look at the amount of cash in the drawer and what the register says should be in the drawer and make sure they match. One of the ways for employees to steal money is to take transactions and not run them through the register, right? Because then you can skim that money off the top. The employer doesn't want this. Now, the employer can stand over the employee and watch them all day. That would work. It's also not a good use of the employer's time. So what does the employer do? The employer is going to enlist you, the customer, to do his job, to watch the employee. How is he going to do it? He's going to incent you. He's going to say, look, watch the employee. If you don't get a receipt, you'll get your purchase free. Now you are, for free, performing a security service for the employer against the employee. Right? You have the capability to do it. You're there. And that sign gives you the interest. And that, to me, is a phenomenally excellent security system. So even with all of this, and this is often a hard pill to swallow, we have to accept risk. Right? Life is risk. Countermeasures reduce risk, but they never reduce it to zero. Right? That light fixture could fall on you guys. I'm sorry, it just can. It's unlikely, but there is some residual risk. And trade-offs can quickly reach the point of diminishing returns. Right? We can encase you in a steel cage to protect you more, but we're starting to get really silly really fast. So what we do is we negotiate the best we can to mitigate the risks that are reasonable, and we accept the rest. And that actually is what being alive means. Right? There's no way around that. All right, so a couple of things. Jeff mentioned some of this. I gave you all a copy of, actually do it on the bottom first. Cryptogram is my newsletter, and it's nice to hear that most of you get it. Anyone who doesn't get it, that's the URL down there, or you can just hand me a business card. It comes out monthly. I really enjoy writing it. I get great feedback. And it's sort of my monthly rant on different security topics. On top is, I guess, my book of 2 years ago. And you all got copies in your bag. And Jeff was right. I am actually cleaning house because a new book's coming out. But this seemed like a good place to clean house, too. So if you already have a copy, please pass it on to somebody else. I have a couple of new books. One I don't have a slide for. This is a book called Practical Cryptography. This is a more mathy book, and it came out a couple months ago. Written with Niels Ferguson, who used to work with me at Counterpane. There are copies for sale at the bookstore. It's not really a follow-on to Applied Cryptography, but in some ways it is. Applied Cryptography tried to cover all of cryptography, right? Cover the breadth of cryptography. That's gotten too impossible to do now. There's too much of it. What this book does, Practical Cryptography, is it covers what you need to know a little deeper. And it's really designed for programmers who are actually implementing this stuff. I do have a new book coming out next month. Don't scare me. This book speaks, it's a lot of the things I talked about here. It's not a computer security book. It is a real-world security book. It actually isn't in that ugly salmon. It's in a very loud orange. This is the only one I have. You can't have it. And it's coming out probably in about 3-4 weeks. And I'm really happy with this book. I think I'm hoping it'll inject some sanity into the security debate that's going on, especially as the next presidential election cycle comes up. So it'll be coming out in a few weeks. And I think that's it. Time for a couple of questions. I ran a little bit longer than I wanted to. And you're the first hand, so you get to ask the first question.
Going back to your home security model, do you see a future in our industry for an underwriter's laboratory of software? Some company at stake has verified there are no buffer overflows in this software.
Right.
Seal of approval kind of deal?
The question was about an underwriter's laboratory, a seal of approval in the computer industry. I think there is. It's hard to do right. It really is hard to do right. And I've written about this in Cryptogram a couple of years ago. But there certainly is a place for certifications. Whether it is certifying that the software is free of buffer overflows or correct or secure, or an insurance company who certifies that, whatever it is, will pay for the losses if you get any. I mean, there's sort of two. Basically, you want someone else to shoulder the risk. And they can do it by ensuring that it's actually good or by ensuring that you won't suffer losses if it's bad. Both of those work, and you don't care which. But yes, there's definitely a model for that. I will be around all day. I know after this I have to go to a press room and talk to people, and then I will be around. So I'll take one more question, then I'll go. Can you get a copy of my presentation? Yes, but not now. Yeah, you can send me, if anyone's got a presentation, send me email. I mean, I will get on the website eventually. I'm still tweaking it, so I don't want to do it just yet. But if you send me email, I'll send you a copy. Schneier at counterpane.com. So thanks very much. Enjoy your day.